Now let's look at mail retrieval using standard protocols such as POP3 and IMAP. So we'll label this section mail retrieval using POP3 as well as IMAP. There are many programs that provide this functionality for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, but the program that comes with Red Hat Enterprise Linux that's commonly used and is fully featured and easy to configure is named Dovecot. So features mail retrieval using standard protocols. And common package is Dovecot. So Dovecot implements a POP3 and IMAP server that you can then configure your clients to connect to, and Dovecot supports both mbox as well as maildir formatted messages. So supports both mbox, which means var spool mail followed by username, and in that single file are all the messages, and maildir formats. So regardless of the type that you have in place, Dovecot supports them both and provides access via standard TCP ports for POP3 as well as for IMAP. In addition, Dovecot supports SSL, meaning POP3 secure and IMAP secure, if you're concerned about the transfer of information between the client and the server. With that said, let's install. So our first task is to install Dovecot. Again, there are other IMAP and POP3 related programs such as University of Washington's IMAP-D as well as QPOPper, but again, Dovecot's the commonly used or de facto standard, at least in my experience, and it is included with the Red Hat Enterprise 5 build. So here's the package. Of course, we'll use yum to install it on a remote system, Linux CBT Server 4. And this will get the process going unless it's installed already. Checking repository. And there we see the installation of Dovecot. Now let's RPM query list the package to see what's included. And we'll scroll up towards the top. It isn't a big package. It includes a primary config file, etc dovecot.conf. And this is the primary config file. Now let's navigate back to the dump. There's a PAM entry for authentication, since Dovecot handles authentication, meaning connectivity from a client with a certain set of credentials, username and password. There's an OpenSSL configuration file located beneath etc PKI. And that's Dovecot. This is for SSL config. There's a start file in the init directory. The binary is located in user lib Dovecot. These are various plugins, various modules that are used by Dovecot. And these are the libraries as opposed to the binary. The primary binary is located in user sbin Dovecot. And there are helper binaries such as user libexec Dovecot IMAP, similar to postfix placing its items beneath user libexec. Dovecot places its items beneath user libexec Dovecot IMAP, and or Dovecot including entries for IMAP, IMAP login, POP3, POP3 login, and then there's documentation. So to be sure that the program will start when the system is rebooted, let's get the name of the process from, or the service from the init directory. We'll execute check config 3.5 Dovecot on, and then we'll execute service Dovecot start. And we'll follow that up with netstat-ntl. Notice it reads starting Dovecot IMAP. If we grep 110, which is the POP3 protocol port, we see that Dovecot's listening to IPv6 and 4. 143 is the IMAP port, and we see again that Dovecot's listening to the appropriate port, port 143. If we apply the P option to the POP3 port, we see that it's listening. So great, our system's up and running. We could actually connect to it from the remote Windows system or from a remote mail user agent such as Outlook Express or Evolution. But before doing so, let's take a look at that Dovecot config file. We'll list the contents of it, and we'll see some defaults such as the base directory, the protocols to enable IMAP POP3, POP3S, and IMAP-S. This item is commented, which IP addresses to listen to, the where to log information, the timestamp to place into the logs, whether or not SSL should be disabled. The default is set to no, and quite a few other settings to control connectivity. If we netstat ntlp grep dov, we'll see reports that are currently being served, and we see both IMAP as well as POP3S security ports. So the default configuration, and this wasn't always the case with Dovecot, but default configuration binds to POP3, POP3 secure, IMAP, and IMAP secure. Now just a quick word about POP3 and IMAP. POP3 supports downloading of messages from a server with the optional ability to leave the messages on the server, but the POP3 protocol is used primarily to download messages to the client. The secure version of the protocol simply encrypts the transmission stream. The IMAP protocol leaves the messages on the server. So leaves messages on server, downloads messages to client. That's a major difference between the two protocols, and you'll need to determine what suits your environment in order to move forward. But the default configuration provides access via both methods, via both protocols, POP3 as well as IMAP, in both clear text and secure versions. Both IMAP and POP3 protocols operate in clear text, which means a middleman who is someone who has access to the communications stream between the client and the server will be able to sniff credentials used to access email, which is why you should always consider using POP3 secure or IMAP secure wherever possible. So a second task would be to configure mail client to download messages using perhaps POP3 for a given user, root, Linux CBT, what have you. Now the flow of things will be as follows. You will send a message, let's say, or we will send a message using MUT. MUT consults sendmail. Sendmail places into the postfix queue. Postfix delivers the message to remote system, and then we'll retrieve the message using perhaps POP3 or IMAP. This is the general flow. Locally on the Linux CBT Serve1 box, we generate a message, press Y to send, sendmail is invoked, the message is placed into the postfix queue. Postfix then delivers the message to the remote system using the assistance of DNS. And once a message has been delivered to the remote system, we will download the message using POP3 or IMAP, or POP3 secure or IMAP secure, either or. But that's the standard flow from one client or one user to another user. So we will connect using our desktop to our Windows box located at 176. Let's history grep from our local system, that is our desk, see if it's in our memory, and we want to connect using history item number 921, that is, using exclamation 921. This will pop up a full screen of the Windows XP box, giving us the ability to log in as a user who has the rights to authenticate to the system, such as administrator. And now we have a desktop. If we navigate to Start, All Programs, we should be able to set up our Outlook Express environment if Outlook Express is installed, and it usually is. Here it is. So we'll click on it and instruct Outlook Express to download messages from our POP3 server. Now this Outlook Express is configured with old settings, but we cleaned it out, so that's why it's prompting us, and we'll indicate our name to be the following: root at Linux CBT serve4, and the suffix. We'll click on Next. indicate the IP address. Again, this is the name of the profile. The display name, we'll take it and just include it as our email address. And the incoming POP server will be referenced as follows: 199. The outgoing SMTP server will be the same server. Postfix allows users on the same local area network to send messages using its SMTP interface without having to authenticate. In other words, it trusts users connected to the local host, meaning the Postfix host, or on the local subnet. But it does not trust users on other systems. Now, the mail server is a POP3 server, but we could optionally specify IMAP or HTTP when configuring Outlook Express. We need to indicate a password for root, for connecting to the server, and then attempt to download the messages for the user. We won't import any Outlook settings. We'll just move forward. We had Outlook available from one of our previous demonstrations of OpenPGP when we integrated the software with Outlook. So now we get the default message, and if we click on Control-D to delete the message, it's gone to the deleted items folder, and we'll click on Send and Receive to try and download a message from 199. This launches the connection, and from a shell we can determine, and notice this says it pretends an authentication certificate. This means Outlook Express is attempting to connect to the server using TLS. Now let's just confirm our password once more. We'll allow it. We'll always allow it for the site, and it doesn't like the password. Let's try it again. Send and receive. And let's try as a user Linux CBT. Perhaps we just don't have the right password. And we'll tell it to process the email account. This is the PGP software popping up. We'll cancel it. And we'll just try to download the messages without PGP's assistance. So send and receive. Now we're checking Linux CBT's mail as opposed to root's mail. So that means from the Linux box we'll need to send messages to Linux CBT and double check root's password. The reason why we're unable to log in as root is because we've forgotten root's password, which happens. So now let's connect to Linux CBT serve 1, which is the .10 IP address. Log in as root, and it's not taking the password. We'll try it again once the prompt returns. And if you're impatient, we can launch a new session independent of this session and reconnect to the host. And it still doesn't let us in. This is the same problem we faced trying to connect earlier. Now it lets us in. That's more like it. So in this shell, now we've regained access, so that means we remember the password. So in this shell, we'll launch MUT and create a new message to the user Linux CBT at linuxcbt.internal, because DNS will take care of sending users to the appropriate system. Testing email using POP3, and we'll ignore the body and just Shift:WQ Y to send. We'll quit, and then momentarily when we click on Send and Receive, the message will be downloaded into the user's mailbox. So there's a message. This message was sent to Linux CBT at linuxcbt.internal from root on a remote system. Here's the fully qualified name of the host, the FQDN. And if our SMTP server is able to find Linux CBT serve 1, we'd be able to respond to the message. So we're pulling messages using POP, and in fact, let's go to Tools Accounts just to double check the actual POP3 settings. It is POP3, and under Security, no signing certificates have been assigned, and POP3 security has not been turned on for incoming mail. So with that said, let's turn on POP3 security. The server requires a secure connection. What we saw earlier was simply PGP interfering with the process. POP3 secure uses 995, which is enabled on the Dovecot server. Also, as we've mentioned, we had the ability to leave the messages on the server when using POP3. Below we see leave copy of the message on the server for a set number of days. Now we'll try to send and receive again, and this will use the SSL connection. We'll just tell PGP to stay out of our connection and interact with Outlook Express. We'll continue using the server, and now we're connected securely using SSL port 995. We know we are because in Tools Account, the switch or the checkbox is set to POP3 secure. Otherwise, it uses plain old 110. Now, insofar as IMAP is concerned, you'd need to change the protocol in order to download messages using IMAP. We can do so by recreating the connection altogether. Let's go ahead and remove this profile. And we'll add a new profile, a mail profile we'll call it, same email address that's in memory, root@linuxcbt. This time let's call it simply internal. That's how we'll receive messages anyway, since Outlook Express has the ability to maintain multiple accounts. And this time we'll use IMAP, same IP address for incoming and outgoing, and we'll use linuxcbt's account with the appropriate password. We'll finish, and then this will attempt to connect. And when you use IMAP, a separate tree is created over to the left with the IP address or name of the server's IMAP connection. Now it says the IMAP server has rejected our connection. That's always a credentials issue. That means we've indicated the wrong password. So here we see a tree distinct or independent of the default inbox where POP3 messages flow. And this view represents messages on the server. For example, if from the shell we were to send a message using MUT from serve1, new message, to linuxcbt at linuxcbt.internal, and the subject indicate testing IMAP, and in the body we'll insert testing IMAP from Outlook Express, escape shift:/WQ, and then send the message. This message will be available using MUT on the remote server, but will also be available using IMAP if we click on Send and Receive. So momentarily, we'll see the message. There it is, but this message remains on the server. We can interact with it, make changes to it, so on and so forth. Now how about sending a message? We'll create a mail and send it to root@linuxcbt serve4 linuxcbt internal. Testing SMTP, and this is a postfix matter, using postfix to relay message. We'll send using Control Enter, and this will attempt to send the message using the postfix server. We'll tell PGP to ignore it. We don't want it to be involved in the process. It's popping up and the license has expired, but nonetheless, as long as the outbox is cleared and the sent items reveals what's been sent, then that tells us that the message is gone. So we sent it to root@linuxcbt serve4. Let's confirm that it was indeed sent by SSHing to linuxcbt serve4. We'll accept, as we have no choice, of course. Authenticate, and then launch MUT, where we should see the message as root, and there it is. So we've received the message, and if we reply to this message, it will be sent to linuxcbt at linuxcbt.internal. And also notice the header included by the PGP software, including the host on which it was created. We'll reply to linuxcbt as opposed to root, and insert simply got it. Send the message, now it's gone, and momentarily the message will appear in the IMAP inbox of the user linuxcbt, and there it is. So here's a response, got it. So using IMAP and POP3 is really straightforward. Using POP3 and IMAP Secure is also really straightforward. Just navigate to the properties of your account setting and then change the connection to ensure that it requires SSL. POP3 uses port 995, IMAP uses port 993. Click on OK, send and receive. This will refresh your folder list, and providing there's no problem accepting the SSL certificate, the default certificate that was generated, you should have no problem whatsoever receiving the message. And also, providing you're able to relay through your postfix server, you should have no trouble accessing your messages. Again, an RPM query list of Dovecot reveals the included files. all the protocols are turned on by default. We did mention that there's an SSL config file located in etc PKI Dovecot. Let's navigate briefly into etc PKI Dovecot. Take a brief look at the Dovecot OpenSSL conf file. This file contains template information for the country, locality, so on and so forth. If you uncomment these items, you can generate a new key based on the values in the file and have Dovecot use it the next time you restart it. Beneath Dovecot, we see two directories, certs, which contains the public key, just like with the SSL server, and that's the public key to Dovecot PM. And we also see a private directory which contains the secret key. This secret key is again similar to the private key or the .key file used on the Apache server. You'll find that all SSL and TLS PKI compliant programs work in a similar fashion. And that is, they have a public key private key pair or a PKI setup such that you have to maintain two sets of keys, and the private key tends to be heavily restricted in terms of who has access to it. You can again generate a new key by updating the contents of Dovecot OpenSSL.cnf and using genkey with the following file. That'll generate a new item. Now again, just ensure that the service starts when the system starts. List Dovecot to be sure that it's on, and we see that it's on in the various run levels that are of interest, 3 and 5. So again, Dovecot's very simple to set up. You install it, it enables the appropriate ports by default. Next, that NTLP, grep, IMAP, and you'll see, or in this case, Dovecot, and you'll see IMAP as well as POP3 for both secure and clear text-based communications. Once it's up and running and your users have access to it, you'll be able to download messages using either protocol, and providing you've configured the email clients correctly with an SMTP server, you'll be able to route messages outbound to remote hosts relatively quickly. So that's a little bit about implementing Dovecot. It's really not terribly difficult to implement. It's relatively straightforward.